Hello, Keith Rucker here at VintageMachinery.org. Well guys, I'm getting back onto the Monarch 16-inch lathe restoration. Had a couple of jobs come up in the shop I need to take care of, so it took a little break, but we're getting back onto it. And we're getting real close to kind of getting the headstock on this thing buttoned up. Then I can start working on the saddle and the carriage and all that kind of stuff. So right now, I think what we're going to do is we're going to get in here. I've got a few more handles we need to get put on here. We need to get our linkage going that turns the motor on and off. That's in the back side. And then get this panel, this cover on the front here with the handle that we repaired for the on-off switch, and make sure all that's working. So let's get in here and get going. So I've got three selector knobs that need to go on here. One on here, here, and here. And it's going to take a little trial and error to get these figured out where they go. They're all the same handle, they're the same length, they would all fit on each one, but each one of them has a hole drilled in it with a spring pin holding it in place. And these holes were pretty much drilled by hand on the machine, so we got to figure out which holes line up for each one. I've already done a little bit of looking on this, and I think this one goes here. So let me see, I got a little piece of wood right here. Let me drive that on there. All right, I got this thing going on here, and one thing that's handy when you're trying to line holes up like this, get a good taper punch, and you can usually kind of get it in there and even kind of tap it in place, and that will really help get these lined up where we can get a spring pin in there. I think we are pretty well lined up there. So I'm going to take my spring pin now and we'll tap it in place. All right, that one is in place. One down. And that just moves the gear on the inside in there. All right, two handles. Multiple guesses as to which one goes where. One thing I'm going to do here, to kind of help me out is I'm going to put a line on this end here that kind of shows the orientation of that hole, because once I get this on there, if it moves a little bit, I really can't tell. And that'll help me hopefully get this thing lined up just right. That should be close. I think we about got this one lined up. See if we can get that pin to go in now. All right, two down. Again, I'm going to mark this. Just helps me kind of make sure we're keeping things oriented properly. Alright, I can tell that my hole is partially lined up. I'm going to pull it out a little bit with this punch. I'm going to go to my next size punch. No, it's not quite enough. Let's see, will this one start? Yeah. You see it pull out just a little bit. That's what I was after. And that looks like a clean shot through there. So drive this one home. All right, we have our control handles in place. Looks good. So I'm on the back side of the lathe now, and what we got back here, there's a control rod here and down here. And basically this is a linkage that goes from the controls on the front. There's a lever on the front that turns the headstock on and off, and it goes through a little control lever that goes through the lathe and comes out here. And then there's a rod that goes up and connects it up here. So we need to get all this hooked up. We're gonna start with the top piece here. And this has just it's got a key in it. So we'll just put it in place. And there's a set screw on the back here. Get my Allen wrenches. There's just a set screw back here on the back, and we'll tighten this up and get that engaged there. Okay, that should have that one in place. And then there's another little arm right here. This one goes on the bottom, and we got a spring pin that goes through this. Let me get my hands on that spring pin right here. This one's a little bit more aggravating. Right now this rod will turn completely around. We got to get it in the right position, which I'm pretty sure is right here. Based on the orientation of the hole, that's what the whole thing is based on here. Okay, that should be pretty close to getting this pin started. There we go. All right, that's got that one in place. And then there's a rod that goes up between these. And there's a couple of pins that hold that in place. Let me get all that hardware ready to go. So the way this works is we got a pin that goes through here. There's a little set screw in the end. There's a little dimple in this pin. So that's got to get lined up. And to make that easier, again, I can't see that dimple, so I'm gonna just put a little mark on the end here that shows the orientation of that, so I can get that dimple lined up. And we'll take our rod, oops, goes this way. We'll get it all lined up here. And make sure that dimple's in the right direction. Okay. And we will tighten the set screw up on there. And that's got that rod in place. And we'll do the same thing down here on the bottom, same process. First thing I'm gonna do is mark my pin. See, there's a dimple going up right there. Okay. And let's tighten that set screw up. Okay, so now when you pull up on the rod on the front of the machine, it will pull up here and actually engage the clutch in the headstock up here. So it's just a linkage to connect all that. And that's all reconnect it. Let's go back down to the other side. So again, we have our repaired handle here. When we did this, one thing that I noticed is that this gear wasn't exactly perfectly perpendicular to this back here. It was off just a little bit. It's really not going to matter if you see this thing turning around. There's a little bit of gap in a place, but this handle is only making just a tiny little bit of a movement, only about that much. So it's really not going to matter for anything. The important thing is that this is running true with the spindle, and that the gear goes on. And speaking of the gear, it goes in. Let's see, which side's the big side on this? There's a tapered pin that goes through here. All right, so that's the big side. You can tell because it goes down farther. And this is the big side of the hole. So I'm just going to put that in there. Tapered pin comes down through here. We'll tap it in place and lock it in. All right, so now my handle's on here. And again, it's only going to make about that much of a turn, and that's going to fit into another bevel gear up on the side of the quick change gearbox. That bevel gear goes through to that linkage that we just worked on. So this plate should now be ready to go back onto the machine. So here's the side of the quick change gearbox. This is where that plate fits on that we just had. Right here, there's a shaft that's going to come through right here. Got a bronze bushing. That's going to kind of be our guide to get this thing started with. And now the next thing I got to do is make sure this handle is engaged. You see there's a little flat on here. There's just, again, a little bit of a movement, and we'll have to pick up on that gear in there. That's it right there. And we'll take some socket cap screws and button this all up. Can't get this one in here this way because of the handle, so I'm gonna have to come in this way, but it's a little bit tight, so I'm just gonna put a little cheater bar on here. That's just like a little piece of tubing, and it will just allow me to get some leverage on this thing out here where I can tighten this last one up down here. Here we go, and that's got it, and that should engage and disengage the headstock once we get everything going. So the next thing I think we're going to do is put this rack back in, and if you remember from when we took this off, there are alignment pins all the way down this thing that get this rack perfectly aligned, and then there's holes for set screws to go in as well. Now I want to point something out here, and I didn't discover this until I already had this rack off, and it would have made taking this rack off much easier had I known. But each one of these holes here, of course, there's a place for a screw to go up in here that tightens it on there. You can see where the pins are, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a hole beside each pin. And the holes next to this pin are actually tapped so that you can take the next size screw, screw it into the actual rack itself and tighten it up, and as you do, it serves as a jack, and it kind of pulls these out. So you can go down through here and put equal pressure on each one of those pins and pull this thing out straight. Had I known that, it'd have been a lot easier to have gotten it off, but no big deal. I just will point that out in case someone behind me is coming along and doing this. Neat little tip to save you some trouble. So that is kind of on there. I'm going to just take a dead blow here. We'll get them pretty well in. All right, and now I can come with my screws and actually attach it in place. All right, nice pretty rack mounted back in there. Of course, that's for the carriage. When you crank the hand wheel on there, it's what moves the carriage up and down the lathe. So that's all back on. Guys, I think that's going to be a wrap on this episode. We have got this pretty much the headstock into the lathe pretty well done. So we're going to start working on the saddle and the apron and get all that stuff ready. That's going to be my next step. Probably going to be working on the apron next. I need to tear it down, check everything out, see what needs to be repaired, see what new parts we may need, and get it painted, cleaned up, and put back together. So check out the next one, and we're going to continue restoring this early 60s Monarch Model K 16-inch lathe. Thanks for watching.